Because PowerPoint wouldn't let me start with slide 0, I have 11 slides here, but I have been told that this is a 10-slide pitch, but you can have a title slide that doesn't count toward that total 10. So this is my elements of the pitch as I define them. You're going to work with your students, your entrepreneurs, to kind of tailor this as you need. The order in which I have it is not mandatory. It's a guideline that helps walk through it. And I have a couple suggestions for how to build a better pitch on another slide. But I'm going to walk through these 10 and talk about them in somewhat detail just so you understand what this is. So that title slide with logo and tagline, that's just your introductory slide. That's the saying, here's who we are, here's what we're about, here's our visual brand and what we're doing. So it meets those creative aspects of your rubric and introduces you, frankly. I think that the design of a pitch can be really advantageous in showing your credibility to a judge and showing that you've put a lot of effort into something. I always love to start a pitch with a story. You're talking about a customer and a problem in that story, and you're making it relatable to your audience. So if you just talk about what you're doing and what your business is, you don't really engage the audience as much as you can. Bringing people into the story is everything. It makes every story relatable. I mean, the only thing I can think of is like WALL-E, the Disney movie. But even that, they've personified this robot to have character and have emotion. And if people have emotion, you get engaged. You can relate to it. If you tell a story that nobody can relate to and they don't know the market, they don't know anything, then you've failed. So you need to make it relatable as possible. So I always talk about when you're talking about anything, assume that your audience doesn't know anything and that they're in 6th grade. And that's a nice way to build a story up nicely that makes it relatable. But the two key things there are you want to highlight a key problem and who that customer is. The third slide is that you have this innovative solution to the problem that exists with a little bit of how it works. So you drop the hammer saying, this person had this problem, and I've got this great solution, and here's how it works. Ideally, you'd do that in a couple slides, but because of the restriction, you got to be able to do this in one slide. You got to show off whatever it is and talk about it in a meaningful way as best you can in one slide. Fourth is your market size, so the number of potential customers with the same problem. So what is the opportunity that exists? How big is that market? How much money can you make? How many other people like that one customer you talked about, or group of customers you talked about, have that same problem? Number 5, how will you reach these potential customers and get them to buy? So I call this a go-to-market strategy. So really talking in detail about how do you get your product in front of their face, and then they say, yes, I will buy it. And you can have multiple strategies behind that. You can say we're going to have a 3-prong approach, we're going to do direct sales, we're going to have online sales, we're going to do blah, blah, blah. But it's just a go-to-market strategy, a marketing strategy, if you will. 6, who is your competition, how you beat them. If you don't talk about the competition, that's a bad thing. You need to highlight, you need to focus on the elephant in the room and say, there are other competitors out there. But here's why I'm so much better than they are. Here's why our product is awesome. You don't have to knock them down. My suggestion is not to knock down your competition. It's just saying, here's why we're better. Here's what they do. Here's what we do. That's my competitive analysis that exists. There might be some students who say there really are no competitors. Well, one of the competitions is the customer doesn't do anything. They don't change the way they are. Apathy. If that's a competitor, they have to explain that reality and show why this is such a compelling solution and that the problem is great enough that they're willing to overcome it. Customer apathy is larger than you imagine. Yeah, seriously, right? Number 7, what will you charge these customers for your product or service? How do you make money? So you can make money in multiple ways. We have some of our startups are charging monthly subscriptions for access to their software. They do it on multiple tiers. So depending upon the number of features or size of your company, they're going to charge you differently. Then there's also secondary ways that they can make money, so that they actually generate data behind the scenes, and then that data can then be resold to other third parties, and not necessarily even the customers. So they have 2 revenue streams. One is the actual software subscription sales, and another is actual through sales of subscription to the data. It's one example of a way to make money. So think about the fact that and work with your students, your entrepreneurs, to say there can be more than one way to make money. You don't have to just charge for one thing as a business. Number 8, financial forecast. As it states, this is where we talk about the reasonable financial forecast. Ideally, what you're showing us is that you know the unit economics, and you know what your costs are, and you know when that break-even point can exist. One easy way to show this is in this nice line chart, which, for lack of a better way of doing it, I'm going to do it with my hands. Should have put it on my slides. So you have your dollars on your y-axis. Your x-axis is time, units in months. Your cost curve is going to be relatively linear, but upward over time. Start with a fixed cost that's greater than 0 at month 0. That's going to go up over time. Your revenue is going to start at 0, and it's going to hopefully look like a hockey stick. Up and to the right. And at the intersection of your cost and your revenue is your break-even point. That's a nice way to easily visually represent your financials in a pitch format, to show break-even and reasonable costs over time. To get into a detailed financial statement in a pitch is almost impossible. Don't underestimate the ability to make sure you have that as a backup, as a pitch, and maybe have even an appendix slide, which is not really allowed, but if you have something that you can back up the numbers with, saying you understand how much money you're making, yes? I think that would be fantastic. That's actually what I recommend when I talk to my entrepreneurs and going into a pitch with investors, is to have your slides up front. So I've been given the go-ahead from the powers that be. The students have to do 10 slides under 10 minutes during that allotment. During the Q&A, if they want to have additional slides to back up some of the possible questions, specifically financials, feel free to include that. But clearly delineate on slide number 12, I guess, because the title slide's 1. Slide 12 should say appendix, and then anything after that is good. So that way they don't get disqualified for any weird reason. Slide number 9, where are you now? Next steps. So I think a really nice statement as an entrepreneur is saying, what have I achieved to date? Where am I? What have we done? How many customers have we talked to? What partnerships have we established? How far are we in building our prototype or product? That's a really nice way to sum up to your judges that you've done a lot of work. And it shows the effort you've made. And the next steps is really nice because it's showing you have a plan in place of what you're trying to achieve, even post competition. Because I think the judges are going to be more inclined to back a student team that is showing that they want to move forward with this. It's not just something they check the box off. It's not something they did for a class project. They're really interested in pursuing this business. Because they're allotting a fair amount of prize money to this. And support for that. So I think that's a nice piece to think about. And then there's a team slide, which highlights who your team members are. And then there's always a wrap-up. Thank you. Summary of what you're really trying to achieve, and some contact information that can go with that. It's a presentation piece. It's a professional element of finishing your pitch. Oh yeah, this doesn't work. Dang, that's not plugged in. That's why it's not working. Seriously, error exists between the chair and the computer. Pitch assessment, presentation. So I'm going to go into the rubric now, and I'm going to show you exactly which slide I believe these things fit on. So the presentation is the first area that's assessed. So the team is prepared and polished. My recommendation is practice, 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 practice. This is not something that teams should take lightly. They should be practicing at least twice a day leading up to this. From a teacher's perspective, that's difficult, right? But it's certainly something they should work with their parents, coached on to say, if there's anything you need to make sure is that you want to be prepared and polished, it'll pay off in the end, I promise them. So there's a clear yes, Dan. Probably not. So the question is, will they have access to the rooms on the regional or UK to do a dress rehearsal? I'm assuming no. It'd be nice if they did. We don't know, though, so I'm going to assume no. We'll see if we can. Another thing that works really well for the teams that I work with is recording the pitches and have them watch it. People hate doing it. People hate the sound of their own voice, right? But it works. It works so well. I do this at UpTech. I record every pitch that our teams do. I make them watch them, and it pays off because there's things that even body language things where they tick, they sway, they say certain words a lot, things that they wouldn't necessarily pick up in just practicing, that they can watch and really say, that's really annoying, or that wasn't as clear as I'd like it to be. It does help a lot. Another thing they assess, is there a clear problem? We hammer that home all the time. There's a clear problem for a customer group. There's an innovative and effective solution. That's the solution slide. Judges' questions are answered in a satisfactory manner. This is where just knowing your content's really important. So beyond what's in that pitch, you do want to make sure you go back to your written application because you're going to have a lot more detail in there about your financials, about how you really make money. I'm assuming the judges are going to ask more questions about the financials than anything else. They always do. Yes? So judges will have a written assessment that they have in front of them, but they're also going to go through a course beforehand so they understand the process and how they should ask those questions and what they should be looking for. All teams participate collaboratively in the pitch. My recommendation has always been that one person should pitch. However, with this competition, all team members must own some aspect of that presentation. So keep that in mind. Yes. I always coach one because it's usually a 5-minute pitch. Usually, this one you can do up to 10 minutes, but usually these things are 5 to 7 minutes, and to bounce back and forth can get confusing. It takes longer to prepare for it. So I generally, with entrepreneurs that I work with, coach one because it ends up being smoother. But it can work. It's not like it doesn't, but it tends to work better that way. All business plan areas are covered: summary, product, service, marketing, operations, and finance. And I think we kind of talked about that in my list, but we'll cover them more here. There's a strong narrative for the company and product service. So that's that story, that narrative, that problem solution, the why you exist, the tagline. Everything about those first 3 slides really sets the tone for what that rest of that pitch is going to be to establish the narrative for the rest of the way through. Operations. This company and product service appear ready to launch. Product overview. So when you're talking about your product, you're talking about, one thing actually probably on here would be your timeline. Traction timeline would also go into ready to launch. So it's showing how much you've really thought through your product or service and how far along you are with that. We'll really clarify that piece. There's a clear SWOT done. Again, my recommendation is do not put a SWOT analysis on one slide. It would break up the flow of your pitch, one. Two, it would just be a lot to cover in one slide. Totally. So you're going to be hitting upon the things that you talk about in your SWOT analysis with your competition, your solution, and your market. So I'll get to that, but to answer your question right now, do these have to be clear-cut slides or infographics? My recommendation is make it as engaging as you can. I believe the slides are supporting what you're saying. They are visual aids to what you're saying. Do not read off the slides. Do not do what I did today as a student. Your job is to pitch it and let the slides back up what you're saying in a nice visual way. Ideally, you have one big word on one slide or one picture on a slide, and that's it. And then you talk through it using that visual. Now, you can animate that one slide to kind of get around stuff a little bit. So you can't have more than one slide on something, but you can animate elements. So along those lines, nothing can be internet-enabled because they're not going to have internet that day. Well, they might, but it's not guaranteed. So nothing can link in. It's got to be all built in that one presentation. I wouldn't count on that. I'd say make sure everything's embedded directly into that PowerPoint file. And it should, most PowerPoint stuff you bring in should embed directly into it. So videos, animations, probably wouldn't recommend them. You might be able to get away with some GIFs. GIFs, however one people pronounce it. Animated GIFs and GIFs might work, but even then I'd hesitate with it a little bit. The team identifies strategic affiliates, suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors. Because we're not going to call that out specifically on one slide, I think that can fit nicely into your go-to-market strategy around certain manufacturers or distributors that you're reaching out to, any affiliates that you're working with strategically to market that product, and then also with your traction and timeline, you can talk about any partnerships you've established over the past few months or you're working on in the near future to hit that. There's a prototype that showcases a well-thought-out design process, so you're talking about that in your product overview, as well in your traction and timeline slide. I probably should update this. Traction and timeline slide can be a nice place to put a lot of these things into to show your progress so far to date. And then with a prototype, I think you can show it off if you actually build it with a picture. If you've built an app or at least a visual version of that app, you can show it on the mock-up done on your screen. There's an acknowledgement of how the company may have social impact. I think you can talk about that in the problem and the solution a little bit if you're talking about a social challenge that a group has, even though you're focusing on one person, can fit nicely in there and into why you're doing this and how it's affecting them. Generally, with a market space, you can talk about generally how big that market is and how it applies, and then even in your wrap-up, you could summarize your entire presentation or pitch with saying, this is the implication of why we're doing this and why you should invest in our company or why you should believe in our company. Financials, these would go on 2 slides, revenue model or financial forecast. So how you make money, careful analysis of is obviously a revenue model. Your financial forecast, your reasonable forecast of costs, and financial sustainability can roughly all fit into that financial forecast as you do that. I'd like to get into more detail about that, but I think each company has a little bit of a different story to be told, so I'd almost have to have some examples to go through it in a better way for you guys today. The marketing plan displays critical thought and diverse strategies. So that's your go-to-market slide. There's a reasonable estimate of market size and a clear place for the product or service, so that's your market size slide. The competition is clearly identified and the company differentiates itself. You can think about having a competition slide. So I believe that there is a clear slide around the competition that you have and how you're better than that competition. A lot of people do this in charts, and there's a lot of thought around what works. So there's one way you could do it is you could list all yourself amongst the competitors on the side and have features and check boxes to say they do this, they do this, they do this, we do all of them. Kind of effective. There's another, which is you could do quadrants. So you could say, like, you can use axes and all this stuff to say, like, they are more specialized, less specialized, and all this stuff. You could fit in that way to show that you're just better than the rest with logos. There's a lot of ways you can do this. It really depends on the business. So I can't really say that there's one way or another. I think as you work with your students and you ask these questions, please email me, and I'll be able to work through those more specific examples at that time. And I'll be able to show you some examples. There's a description of the ideal customer and a rationale for that description. Problem, solution, market. We've already talked about that before. But again, being specific into that, who that customer is, and clarifying the problem for them is good. So that's how it's scored. Here are my tips for this. Well, one is just actually a criteria. You cannot have more than 10 slides except for the title slide. However, we have clarified today that if you put an appendix in, that can be okay for the Q&A. You just cannot use it during the 10-minute allotted time. I want you to tell that story. I want your entrepreneurs, your students, to tell the story, tell the pitch as a story to engage the judges. From the very beginning, don't just talk about your idea. Don't tell me what it does. Tell me about the why, the people behind it, the problems they have, what they face, and then get into the details. And if you can carry that narrative through, it works really nicely, because even if you end that last slide by bringing up that person again, it does a really nice way of framing your story. I do suggest using standard fonts or make those text into graphics, because if you're going to be throwing really cool graphics and fonts in your computer, it likely will go on a thumb drive and go to someone else's computer, and it will not look the same. As you work with students, make sure they're using standard fonts and or creating graphics of that text and then overlaying it. Something people always overlook, they throw it into our computer and they're like, wait, it doesn't look the same as my normal pitch at home. So if they want to make sure it looks really cool, do all that. Do not read from the slides like I am today. The tendency, and everyone does this, even if they have it here, students are going to do this. They're going to turn around. Sound's going to get muffled. The flow's going to get broken. The engagement's lost with the judges. That's where practice comes in. There might be a prompter like this that helps guide that student, but they need to make sure that they're focusing, like really work with them on that. They need to practice that engagement. And the best way that I think is to not read from slides is don't put any text on the slides. So the next thing is use slides as that supporting material and have less text and more visuals. If you don't have text on slides, there's nothing to read. It actually works really nicely as a technique. And it'll make the judge pay attention to them and not read the slide. You do not want any sentences on it. It just doesn't work. There's tons of presentations tons of presentations on YouTube that kids can watch that will really help guide them. So if you look at even our demo day videos from UpTech, the stuff from Techstars, Y Combinator, 500 Startups, they all have their stuff online, and you can watch some awesome pitches that would reflect well with what you're trying to prepare for. Yes? How many judges? I don't believe there's going to be anyone else in the room. And I don't know how many judges we will have, because I think we don't know how many regional applicants there will be. I would imagine we're going to have at least 3 judges per room at a minimum. And I don't think you're going to have other students probably in those rooms. There might be some, but I don't think so. More to come on that.
I have found the audience.
Yeah. Yep. Have we been down to Berea? I mean, do we know how the layout is yet? Or are we still working on that? Okay. Yeah, so I think to answer the question, we don't know yet. Hopefully we'll be able to provide some more detail to the students beforehand, just to say, here's the format, so there's no surprises. I think that will be the minimum we can give them, is at least understand the format and the expectation. But I think we still have to work and go to the universities and colleges to finalize those details. But that's a good input in terms of seeing if we can limit the number of students in that room. Overall, no less than 30-point font size. It does lend to the previous point, which is less text. Make your statements big, bold, relatable to those judges. Don't sit there and have me read anything. Have the judge look at you, not the slides. Practice, practice, practice. Can't say that enough. All right, so 2 more things today. You are now going to take your business models, and you're going to develop your own pitches. Now, we don't have all the benefit of everyone having laptops that they can plug in, so this is going to be something you just do as a vocal oral presentation, but you're going to do 10 slides of your business idea. And you're going to use these 10 as your outline. I don't need you to draw logos unless you want to. But we're going to have you guys put together a 10-slide pitch. This should be no more than 10 minutes. We're obviously not going to have time for everyone to do this today, so maybe we'll just have to draw out of a hat who gets to pitch today. I can keep this up if you guys want to. So you guys are going to have a little bit of time to do this. And then once everybody's done, we'll be 30, 45 minutes. And once everybody's done, I am just going to draw out of a hat because I'm going to have probably 2 or 3 teams do this instead of everyone. But everyone should do it just in a preparatory manner. Any questions? Cool.